On the 7th of April 2015, Five Nights at Freddy's was announced to have the rights for a movie being bought by Warner Brothers Entertainment. And 8 years later, on the 26th of October 2023, is when I finally watched the Five Nights at Freddy's movie twice. So the only question now is, were the critics right about this movie? That's a question that I'm not really sure if I'm ready to answer or not, but I know for certain that this movie taught me something not only about this franchise, but also myself and who I am as a person. You see, on the 8th of August 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's was released into the world by its creator Scott Cawthon, and much like many other people, I was drawn to its unsettling world and characters through Markiplier's playthrough of the first game. Listening to Phone Guy mention these unstoppable, hulking machines that misconstrue as a bare endoskeleton and through simply following their programming, violently shove you into these mascot suits, essentially blending you into nothing but mist, is what hooked me on the sheer horror of this franchise. Game Theory's subsequent upload drawing parallels to a real-life tragedy simply cemented the horror and dread that this game instilled in me. Of course, when you look back at it now, it's like, what were you thinking, Matthew Patrick? Like, come on. Did Bomberman cause the Boston bombings? But by the time that the second game was released, then the third and final game, it had quickly become very apparent to my younger self that this franchise wasn't just a passing interest of mine. Five Nights at Freddy's had become a core part of my identity. I was in love with this franchise, through and through. From the unnerving tension of the first two games to the lore that was introduced in the second and then wrapped up in the third, Five Nights at Freddy's had a stranglehold on my psyche. Around the time of the third game's release, I had started to draw, specifically pictures of the animatronics from the franchise, which was strange because I wasn't a creative person at all. I couldn't draw and had never shown any interest in it beforehand, and I don't draw now. But the sheer amount of passion that I felt for this game series was like no other. This series made me want to express myself, be creative, and put myself out there unabashedly so. So naturally, this all came to a head with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. This game was the one that led to me buying and beating all the other games, despite how terrified of them I was. This game was the peak of my interest in the lore surrounding these games, and I was going crazy about it. I thought I was seeing hidden messages on the menu screen for FNaF 4. Put simply, Five Nights at Freddy's had become a huge part of who I was. The sense of community that had formed around this series made me feel unbelievably welcome and like I wasn't alone. Something my younger self really needed to hear, as I constantly felt like I was some forgettable background character in everyone else's story. As cringy as some may think it sounds, this franchise and its community has got me through some of the darkest parts of my life. So you can imagine that around the release of the fourth game, when the announcement was made that Warner Brothers had bought the right for the movies, I was ungodly hyped. You could have approached it as a more down-to-earth tense movie like the first game, where this person is being stalked and they can't do anything except just survive. You could lean way more into the lore of the games and have a genuinely interesting mystery movie about who was the man in the golden bodysuit, much like we had collectively done as a community over the past 4 games. You could even lean heavily into the latest installment at the time of the franchise and create a movie about the tragedy of what happened to the crying child and his family at Fredbear's. Whichever direction they took this movie in, I was convinced that it would be a cinematic masterpiece of horror. Seeing someone get stuffed into the animatronic suits, or the unsettling way that the purple guy would lure his victims into the back room, the agonizing screams of purple guy as the Springboks crushed his entire body with the weight of all the animatronic parts. This movie was going to be great. I was absolutely certain of it. My hype for the movie continued to build and build and build until over the years, after the release of many books, Pizzeria Simulator and Ultimate Custom Night, we just heard nothing about the movie. Scott had mentioned it once or twice on Reddit, but it really seemed like this movie was never going to come out. A video you could make in your own right, but not one that I'm going to tackle here. My interest in the series was quickly waning. It felt like it had all been wrapped up in Pizzeria Simulator, and it also felt like more and more the series was changing. It and I were slowly drifting apart. It felt like the horror of the series had taken a back seat, and the world of the franchise was quickly being expanded into something unrecognizable from when it started. It didn't feel like this small world with mysteries that we could solve as a community. It didn't feel like this horror franchise where the sheer concept of what these animatronics could do was terrifying. It quickly felt like the series was crumbling under its own weight. I mean, I had kept up to date with all the new releases because I couldn't let this franchise go. It was a part of who I was. Even after the games became more and more and more of a mess of a story, I kept interested in all of it because I had to. I couldn't accept that the games weren't growing and improving like I had. I had every excuse possible to dismiss issues that I had identified because I couldn't bring myself to let go. Oh, that's a spin-off, don't take it too seriously. Oh, that's on a phone, I mean, what did you expect them to do? That's VR, it's a notoriously difficult platform to work with. And culminating with Security Breach and DLC, I decided that, hey, the mainline games might not be for me, but the fan projects and the movie I can still rely on to pull through with the horror. Yep, here I sit, FNaF Plus has been cancelled, and everywhere that I look, people are loving the movie, like unabashedly so. It feels like no one is able to critique this movie. Everyone acts like it's a masterpiece, and I just don't understand why. I don't understand why it feels so wrong that despite the fact that I sat with a screaming crowd of full-suit cosplayers on opening night for the movie who clearly thought it was a masterpiece, I simply don't. Could it be true that I had simply built this movie up to more than it could realistically achieve, all in my mind? Was I simply living for the nostalgia that this franchise was dripping with, or the one thing that I didn't want to accept? Were the critics right? Had this movie that had bounced around from production companies and directors for 8 years really be a 26%er? Leaving the movie theater on opening night, I wasn't sure if I was ready to answer that question. I felt off about the movie. I couldn't decide if I had enjoyed what I had just watched or not. I told myself that maybe it was just because I couldn't hear the damn movie over the crowd screaming and yelling and breaking every single social convention when it came to movie-going etiquette. I hadn't realized it at the time, but this movie was a microcosm of the feelings I had been wrestling with about this entire franchise, not just this film. If you're somehow unaware, recently I did a retrospective of sorts examining what happened to Five Nights at Freddy's, all of this franchise and its glory and its, not so much glory. Partially I did this because I wanted to take a trip down memory lane and give others the opportunity to experience what it was like growing up alongside this franchise for those who weren't there. I wanted to express to others how disillusioned I felt with this core part of my identity. I mean, there's a reason so much of that video is dripping with unnecessary irony and memes. I just couldn't help but feel like I needed to distance myself from being perceived as someone who genuinely loved FNaF. Not because it was cringe to do so, I never cared about what and wasn't cringe, but because I couldn't decide if I actually did or not. And while that may be the reason that I gave myself throughout editing and making the video and uploading it and up until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the truth is I was doing it for a completely selfish reason. What happened to Five Nights at Freddy's was entirely a self-indulgent exercise in understanding my own feelings about this franchise I was so conflicted with. And after releasing the video and then playing Ruin, I had come to the conclusion that I had simply outgrown FNaF. Or at least the games, I told myself. But having now seen this movie, I think I've been able to accept the truth about all of this. After going through the 5 stages of grief, I've accepted that I've grown up and matured and this franchise simply hasn't. If anything, it feels like it's running down and down further towards younger demographics and people who actually cared about what was important in the start of this franchise. The horror, the tense nature of the atmosphere, and the mystery were just being ignored. It's wild to me that I've made so much headway in my life. Hell, I'm almost a qualified chef, and yet somehow Scott is still running this franchise in circles and just building on more and more instead of letting go. This movie laid all of this bare by being the exact same characters from the first game, the same basic premise and location, and serving the same purpose as the first game. This movie was meant to introduce new people into this franchise, much like the first game did. A security guard named Mike Schmidt must survive 5 Nights at Freddy's, much like in the first game. Bonnie, Foxy, Freddy, Chica, and Golden Freddy are all accounted for, much like in the first game. And yet that spark, that lightning in a bottle that the original game had, isn't present. One thing I need to make clear is that my complaint isn't, oh, it's not like the games, because my complaint is that despite having so much potential, it feels like it was wasted. Despite spending 8 years in development, this movie feels like it was rushed. There are parts of this movie that I really like. The animatronics and the suits that were done by Jim Henson's Creature Shop look amazing. The accuracy to the original animatronics models from the games is unbelievable, and they do manage to strike that balance of looking like friendly animatronic performance with that slight air of unease that comes along with that, but it's never capitalized on in the movie. The lighting rarely ever poses them in a dangerous light. They have very little wear and tear for animatronics that have been, well, abandoned for God knows how long. I mean, for fuck's sake, the cupcake is more of a threat in this movie than the rest of the original gang. The opening scene was tense until he gets put in some elaborate saw trap. The time that Foxy is hunting Mike around the pizzeria is tense until Vanessa shows up, upon which the animatronics never go after Mike again? I mean, unless you count the silly looking dream sequences, in which case I ask you, did you come to watch animatronics or poorly acted children? I mean, in good news, the pizzeria, alongside the rest of the movie, looks fantastic and is full of Easter eggs and references for the fans. The Mappat and Corey X Kenshin cameos, the not 1 but 2 Sparky the Dog references, which had my inner child screaming. Chica's Magic Rainbow being at the start of the movie, Dream Theory, Follow Me, the Celebrate poster, the office being decorated exactly the same as the first game, the bootleg merch in the prize corner, It's Me, the blackboard in the classroom, Catch You on the Flip Side, the Employee of the Month cameo extraordinaire, Foxy running down the hallway, Bonnie and the Supply Girls at the 8-bit opening, the Bite of 83 reference, the Elladolf from the books, the Midnight Murderer shirt, like a million audio references, the time-traveling ball pit, I Always Come Back, the Silver Eyes reference, Shadow Freddy, the Man in Room 1280, and the Living Tombstone being in the credits, and the Puppets music box being in the credits, Come Find Me being at the end of the credits, and it's a massive stretch. But this made me think of the fucking barrels from Security Breach. Hunting for these Easter eggs alongside seeing the animatronics come to life was the highlight of the film for me, actually. And that's not to say it's the only good part of the film. Matthew Lillard is kind of threatening at the start of the movie, not because of what he says, but because of the way that he talks. He always has this air of knowing more than he lets on, and yet that's all we get for him before he shows up as an evil mastermind at the end of the film. I can't help but feel like he could have been a reoccurring character, much like the phone guy in the games, and the more and more you listen to him, the more and more you figure out that he had something to do with the disappearances. I feel like Joshua Hutcherson playing Mike was betrayed by the direction that he was given. Similarly with Elizabeth Lail playing Vanessa. They both just feel so stilted all the time. They're not likable or interesting protagonists at all. I'm never given a reason to understand these characters or actually care about what they do. I've seen a lot of people saying that Mike was such a mood in this movie, which is not a good thing. There's a reason y'all are not characters in movies. It's not interesting. He doesn't seem likable. Child actors are always going to be hit or miss, and I think that Abby's actress, Piper Rubio, actually plays a cute yet reserved, likely neurotypical, just listen to a roast Mike, kid pretty well. Doug is a complete highlight of the movie, and Mary Stuart Masterson was as hateable as the movie clearly wanted her to be, regardless of how much that was earned or not. I also did quite enjoy the cinematography a bit. Some of the lightings in the scene is very creative and palatable for the eyes, but one of the aspects that I think this movie falls flat in is the music. Aside from the song that plays over the 8-bit opening credits and, of course, a living tombstone being used for the end credits, most of the music in this movie was incredibly forgettable. The only music that I do remember from this movie, aside from those two, were the ones that were references to the games. This is rather strange, as Five Nights at Freddy's usually has pretty good musical tracks. When it comes to the sound design, I think that it can be pretty hit and miss. At times the animatronics sound imposing, and at other times they're really, really quiet for massive machines. The overall tone that this movie goes for is similarly all over the place. The movie advertised itself as a horror movie, and at times it feels like it wants to be seen as a horror movie, but it feels more like a children's action movie at times. As I mentioned earlier, there are only about 2 times that I thought were actually tense in the movie, and sadly, there weren't any scares that actually worked in my opinion. Having 3 or 4 screamers in your movie does not mean that they're scary. I'm sorry, it's just annoying. The critics unaware with the games were likely a bit harsh to give it 26%. I'd likely float it more around a 45% range, but that's with me trying to take into account my bias from all the Easter eggs and anticipation that I had leading up to watching the movie. The thing is though, I can understand why the critics gave it such a low score, and that is because of the screenplay and direction. The 2 things that, funnily enough, are directly linked to Scott Cawthon. You see, as a part of Scott's deal with handing away the rights to a FNaF film, he wanted to have a significant input in the screenplay and the direction of the film. Scott wrote both the screenplay and the screen story for this movie, and it really shows. The story of this movie is all over the place, and it's not in the same convoluted way of the games, in which case you can kind of forgive it because it's of the medium and the genre of storytelling. A way of storytelling that I would argue is not suitable for a movie regardless, but the story of this movie isn't even bad in that way. The story of this movie just doesn't make sense. It doesn't give you any reason to care about why anything is happening, and it tries to catch you off guard with surprise reveals that aren't earned whatsoever. Vanessa's sudden reveal to be working with him, or the fact that Spring Bonnie or William Afton is her father, or the fact that William Afton is actually Steve Raglan and the bad guy who not only took Garrett but also murdered all the kids that are possessing the animatronics, are just 2 of the many examples of surprise reveals that don't work in this movie. Hell, the only idea that you get that there are children possessing the animatronics come from the aforementioned 8-bit opening credits, unless you count Abby and Mike directly stating it, in which case I'd say that your script needs a couple more drafts before publishing. I seriously can't stress this enough. The fact that the yellow rabbit is at all linked to the death of the children possessing the animatronics, or the ultimate driving force of malice in this whole situation, is only shown in the 8-bit credit animation at the start of the movie. And that's a huge detriment. This is meant to be the big bad guy of your movie because they wanted the animatronics to be relatable and empathetic. But it's not earned whatsoever, it just comes out of nowhere. It makes the movie feel rushed, which it certainly wasn't. This movie has gone through so many scripts and revisions that something this crucial shouldn't have slipped through the cracks. The only way that you would know that the Yellow Rabbit is important is if you're a pre-existing fan, which I would happily grant you if this was a fan film or something, but it's not. This movie is meant to be an adaptation of the original story. It's meant to be the catalyst that will set many other children down the same road of endearment for this franchise I was set on all these years ago. Even if you're adapting from the books weren't made for the fans. The books stand as their own thing. You don't need to know the games in order to understand the books, which this movie does borrow heavily from the books, and I think that's understandable. The books are the only real canon where Afton actually has any personality, and while he is a mad scientist in that one, I can't help but feel like he's less developed in this movie than he is in the books. Because the truth is, if they really wanted this movie to just be for the hardcore fans, then they didn't lean hard enough in that direction either. The movie feels like a constant cut between a version that was intended for the fans only, and a version intended for general audiences. It's just like a huge identity crisis. It's not even that you can't please everyone. A well-made movie for general audiences would have been received fantastically by fans, who were able to essentially know where they would take the series. I mean, imagine how cool it would be hearing Steve Raglan over the phone in the first movie telling you all about the animatronics and how you can defend from them and what the history of Freddy's was like, and then it's revealed in the next movie that he's actually the killer. But in order to do that, you need the animatronics to be the villains in this film, which they didn't want to happen. They flip-flop between whether they want this to be for fans or general audiences, and if they want it to be a horror or not. So much of this movie is missed potential. I only mention all of these possibilities and what I see is wrong with the movie because I thought it could have been so much better. It's not terrible by any means, but I think I only say that because I'm a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. I just really wanted a more polished movie. I've rewritten the script about 5 or 6 times now, because sometimes I simply go on a diatribe about how I would have written the movie and all my nitpicks that I have with it. I might link that below somewhere, but when the dust settles, all I can take away from this movie is that the critics were, in fact, right. From an objective movie-making standpoint, this movie is not very good. And yet, somehow, despite all my complaints, I had a really good time with this movie. I know, objectively speaking, it's not great, but something about it just speaks to me, and it's probably who I am. It's probably because Five Nights at Freddy's is a core part of my identity. The more and more I reflect on it, the more and more I realize that maybe it's time to let go, however. Not just for me, but for Scott Cawthon as well. I know this franchise is significantly more important to Scott Cawthon than it could ever be for me. I know it's really hard to let go of something that you've created and something that makes you an ungodly amount of money. But much like how the love I harbor for Five Nights at Freddy's is something to be left in the past, for my younger self, I think it too is time for Scott to let go and try his hand at something new. If Scott had never let go in the first place, we wouldn't have Five Nights at Freddy's. We would have had a sequel to The Desolate Hope, and all of this wouldn't have happened. I've come to accept that nothing lasts forever. New things are scary, and it feels like I'm losing a core part of who I am. But learning to accept that, and that maybe feeling empty for a little bit, is the first step to finding new things that will fill you with that same happiness. It's worth it in the end. My time spent with this franchise wasn't all a waste. I mean, for Scott, he impacted millions of people and likely made just as much money. And for me, this franchise taught me what it's like to be creative. There's a reason that this is my 3rd FNaF upload in a row. Something about this franchise makes me ungodly passionate. I've been fighting letting go of this franchise for a while, and I think it's time that I do. This franchise may have taught me to be unabashedly passionate and creative in everything I do, and that's something that I'm forever grateful for, but it's a new chapter of my life. I look forward to using what I've learned over the years growing up with this franchise and other things that bring me great happiness, but for now, thank you, Five Nights at Freddy's, for all the memories. And who knows, maybe in the future our paths will cross again and I'll discover what it is that I fell in love with about this franchise so long ago. But for now, I'll see you on the flip side. Thank you so much, and good night.